Hey everyone, if you're new here, welcome. My name is Keisha, and today I'm going to be talking about the best books that I read in 2022. I know I'm not the only one here that is thinking that this year has just flown by and there have been so many good books along the way. I'm very excited to share with you my top 10 favorite books of the year, but I am going to give a couple of honorable mentions to start out with too. I read a lot of great books this year and I feel like all of these books need some love. So in this video, I'm going to be telling you a little bit about the synopsis of these books, but I'm mainly going to be focusing on why they are mentioned either in the honorable mentions category or in my best books, what made them top for me. So let's just go ahead and get started with my honorable mentions. These are kind of going to be in a specific order from least favorite to favorite, even in the honorable mentions category. But I do have 6 books in this category that I felt like needed some love and I could not go without mentioning. The first one is one of my favorite historical fiction middle grade books, and that is Letters from the Lighthouse by Emma Carroll. I read this book with my middle grade book club earlier this year, and I don't think any of us expected this book to be so good. This was 5 out of 5 stars for me, and it is one of the best middle grade books and one of the best historical fiction books that I have ever read. I don't really read a lot of historical fiction, so I feel like the fact that I'm even mentioning this in this video should kind of pique your interest at least a little bit, because I'm not somebody who gravitates towards historical fiction. This is World War II historical fiction, and I've really found that middle grade books do the types of stories that I enjoy really, really well. And the ones that I enjoy are typically ones that aren't really on the battlefront, but are ones where you kind of see how people come together during war, how friends and family and communities are brought together to survive and help each other and just kind of like unite as a community. And this story definitely has that. Like I mentioned, this is a World War II historical fiction. It takes place in February 1941, where Olive and her brother are evacuated to the Devonshire coast during the war. And before they go, there's an air raid that happens while Olive and her brother and her older sister are at the movie theater, and her sister disappears during this air raid, and she cannot quit thinking about her sister and what happened to her and wondering if she's okay. But she goes to the Devonshire coast and secrets end up getting revealed there. And this is just, I don't want to say a lot about it, but this is just such a good book. Just know that even if you don't love historical fiction, this may be a good one for you. Emma Carroll's writing is absolute perfection. She just has a way of storytelling that is just incredible. I have no words. There are no words in the English dictionary that would describe most of these books I'm going to talk about today. They're just incredible. Emma Carroll is known as the queen of middle grade historical fiction, and I absolutely 100% agree with that. I think if you want a story that is going to really make you laugh, make you cry, and show you the strengths and bonds of family and community, this is the perfect book to pick up. Next, I want to talk about a book that I don't own. I actually read it, I think I listened to it on Audible, and that is Comfort Me with Apples by Katherine M. Valente. This is a new author to me and one that I definitely want to pick up more books from. This is a horror novella, and it was really wild. I can't really tell you what it was about without spoiling it, and I encourage you not to look anything up about it because it would spoil it for you. But just know that this is set in a community that reminds me a lot of just like the Stepford Wives for some reason. Just suburbia. Think suburbia. Everything seems perfect, but everything is not perfect. And that is all you need to know going into this one. I think it kind of depends on what type of horror you like, if you would like this book or not. And I honestly questioned what I even thought about this book by the end of it, but it was really, really good. And I don't know, I thought about it for a long time after I finished it, and I knew that I had to pick up more from this author. So if you haven't read Comfort Me with Apples, it only takes about 4 hours. I think the audiobook is 4 hours, but if you speed it up, you could finish it in 2 hours. So definitely think about picking this one up in the new year if you like horror novels. Another horror novella on my list is The Patient by Jasper DeWitt. This book took me by surprise. I picked it up because it's called The Patient, and it really reminded me of The Silent Patient. It is not the same thing, but it does remind me of it in regards to it being involving someone in a mental institution. And so this is a really uniquely written story. It is written in a series of online blog posts by this man who is a young psychiatrist, and he is chronicling his harrowing account of his time working at a dreary mental hospital in New England. So there is this patient that all these different doctors have tried to work with, and anyone who not only works with him but comes in contact with him seems to go mad or commit suicide. So please check the trigger warnings for this book, because there is mention of that in here. But this one psychiatrist decides that he wants to try to figure this guy out. He wants to meet with him and see if he can cure him. And some crazy stuff happens along the way. Again, this is one of those stories that just kind of depends on what type of horror you like, but I really enjoyed this one. I was traveling with work when I listened to it, and I completed it all in one drive. It was a couple-hour drive, but I listened to it on Audible, and it was phenomenal. So again, if you would like a good horror novella and you haven't picked this one up, I highly recommend it. Another honorable mention is The Ghoul Next Door by Cullen, Bunn, and Kat Ferris. This is one of my new favorite spooky middle grade graphic novels. This is the first book in a series, and I did read the second book in the series, and I honestly wasn't as big of a fan as I was this one, so I would much prefer this be a standalone, but it deserves all the love nonetheless. It follows our main character Gray, and Gray ends up being followed around by this ghoul next door, and this is just such a cool book. I really don't want to say a lot about it. The artwork is very unique. It's not my favorite, but it's definitely something, and I learned to love it along the way. I love the watercolor, and I do think it's very beautiful after reading the story. I think initially I wouldn't have picked this one up, but it was so good. I love seeing the friendship form between Gray and his new ghoul friend, and I love seeing the history behind this of the ghouls and different things that Gray finds out along the way. So if you love spooky middle grade books and graphic novels, I think this would be a total hit for you. The next book is also a spooky middle grade book, and this one is The Clackity by Lora Senf. This really almost made it into my top 10 books. It just missed, but let me tell you guys, this is seriously one of my new favorite spooky middle grade books of all time. Lora Senf is a new author, and this is her debut novel, which is going to be the first in the Blight Harbor series. And I'm telling you guys, if you like Coraline or Portal Fantasies or anything like that, definitely pick this one up because it is so good. Lora Senf writes like a seasoned author, and this was just a phenomenal read. I loved it so much. I flew through it so quick. It follows our main character, Evie Von Rath, who lives in Blight Harbor, which is the 7th most haunted town in America. And she lives with her aunt Desdemona, who tells her never to go to the slaughterhouse, but one day her aunt disappears and she knows that she's gone to the slaughterhouse. So she goes there and she meets this shifty creature called the Clackity, and he tells her that if she can find the ghost of John Jeffrey Pope, who was a serial killer, and bring the ghost to the Clackity, then he will let her aunt go. However, the Clackity is a shifty creature, so should he be trusted? Anyways, this is a Portal fantasy, and you get to see, like, there are different houses in this book that represent different things in the story. This is full of some creepy characters, penny-eyed ghosts and witches, and it is just such a good story, especially during spooky season. If you have not picked up this one, please do yourself a favor and check out Lora Senf's The Clackity. The last honorable mention I have before I get into my top 10 is going to be a series that I never thought I would read, much less fall in love with, but let me tell you how this happened. I was co-hosting a readathon called Suns Out Books Out earlier this summer, and during this readathon we had a movie watch party, but we ended up watching a show on Amazon Prime, and it was The Summer I Turned Pretty, which is based off of the book series The Summer I Turned Pretty by Jenny Han. So I watched a few episodes of the series, and then I binged it because I fell in love with these characters. This is a young adult romance set in the summer on Cousins Beach, and it follows Belly and Jeremiah and Conrad, which are these friends that have grown up together. They spend every summer together, but now this summer, Belly looks a little bit different to the boys, and it becomes like this love triangle situation. And is it teen angsty? Yes. Is there drama? Yes. Is there immaturity? Yes. Is this something I thought I would ever read or like? No. But all of these books were 4 stars for me, but as a whole experience of the show and the books and everything, this is top tier for me. This is a series that I will never forget. I'm obsessed. Like, I even had a friend buy me a Conrad candle because your girl's obsessed with the series and with Conrad, which I know. Again, another thing with these books, there are problematic things, but I don't know. I have such fond memories of this, and it had to be an honorable mention. I love it so, so much. I know it won't be everybody's cup of tea, but it had to go into this video. Okay, now we are getting down to it. This is my official top 10 books of 2022. Not all of these books were published this year, but these are the year that I read them. And I'm not gonna lie, you guys, it was really hard for me to rank these. I will say that my top, I don't know, 3 to 5 are probably most accurate, but it was so hard for me to rank these. And I'm not gonna lie, at the end of this year, I had some books come into play that really rocked the boat. So I know you guys are looking forward to this. So let's just go ahead and jump into my top 10. Coming in at number 10 is My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix. This may come as a surprise to some of you, as it is a surprise to me, because I read a book about exorcisms and demonic possession, and that is not something that I like to read about, which we go into detail about this in some other videos. I do have a vlog where I talked about this book, so I will link it down below, as I'm going to do with some of these other books that I mentioned. But this story, the reason that it is really a top book for me is because of the friendship in this story. If you are looking for a good friendship story or the best friendship story out there, I really feel like this one would hit home for you. Now, of course, Grady Hendrix does write horror novels. This is horror, and this is actually YA as well, so that may not be up your alley. But this is not the scariest thing I've ever read, I will say that. It does follow our main characters, Abby and Gretchen. They have been best friends since the 4th grade, and seeing the development of these girls' friendships just really made my heart flutter. I loved it so much. I don't know if you guys have heard in any of my vlogs. If you watch this one, you'll know. But just like my story of friendships and just coming into my own and coming into be confident in myself and understanding there are seasonal friends, there are lifelong friends, and learning to know the difference and just knowing who I am as an Enneagram 4 and how much I cherish my friendships. This book meant the world to me. It made me laugh. It made me cry. And it was just a whole experience. So definitely check out the vlog that I did on this one down below if you haven't kind of gotten my raw thoughts on it, but I could not put this in my top 10. So obviously you have Abby and Gretchen. Like I mentioned, one of them gets possessed by a demon and the other one is dead set on saving her friend. This is one of the best stories of friendship ever, and I highly recommend picking it up if you haven't done so already. Coming in at number 9, we have a new to me author and quite possibly a new favorite author. So we have The Mother-in-Law by Sally Hepworth. Sally Hepworth is an author that I never thought that I would pick up. She is someone who I would see around that I kind of assumed I would probably read her books and give them a 3-star. She is said to be an author who writes thrillers, but her books are really more like family dramas with a little bit of suspense. And those typically aren't the types of books that I enjoy. However, my friend Elizabeth read one of her books earlier this year and it became one of her favorites, so I had to give it a try. I also read that book, and I will link the vlog to, not this book, but the other book I'm talking about down below, which we'll get to that. Spoiler. So this was another book that along the way I ended up reading. So I've now read 2 of Sally Hepworth's books, and I really wanted to read 3 by the end of the year because I feel like 3 is a good number to determine whether or not somebody's your new favorite author or a new favorite author. But just know that I'm seriously so pleasantly surprised by this book and by this author. This book was a wild ride. Again, it is family drama. It is suspense. Don't go into this thinking it's a thriller. I wasn't sure if I was going to like this very much, and I don't think I liked it as much as the other book that I read by her this year. But at the same time, I still gave this 5 stars, and I couldn't help but do that. So this book follows our main character, Lucy, and she has met her husband's mother, Diana, and they don't really get along super well. There are more family elements in this than I'm just going to initially talk about. Again, I don't really want to dwell on synopses here, but just know that the mother-in-law and daughter-in-law have a really weird relationship, and the mother-in-law ends up dead, and it's kind of like a murder mystery of figuring out what happened to her. Is it a suicide? Did something medical happen to her, or did somebody kill her? So this is just, I don't know. The way that this book made me feel is very not how I expected. This is not a book that is going to make you think. I don't think the intention of Sally Hepworth was to make you hate your mother-in-law or this mother-in-law or anything like that. And I really felt for the characters in this book. And that's another thing. Sally Hepworth writes really character-driven books, which is miles and far between what I love. I love plot-driven books, but her characters are just like peak. So if you have any authors out there and maybe Sally Hepworth's one of them, that you just aren't really sure if you're going to enjoy or you speculate, give them a try, because now I think I might have a new favorite author. Coming in at number 8 on my list is a middle grade graphic novel that is one of my new favorites, and I'm going to talk about both volumes of this. So I have Cici's Journal. This is The Adventure of a Writer in Training, which is book 1 by Joris, Chamblain, and Aurelie Neyret. And then I have book 2, which is Cici's Journal, Lost and Found. This is one of the most beautiful, like, illustrated and written stories that I've ever seen. Cici's journal follows Cici, and she does have clips of her journal in this story. So you have kind of like a scrapbook style in here, but then it also goes into a graphic novel. And again, this is some of the most beautiful artwork I've ever seen, but the stories are really, really good, and they really gripped my heart. This one is definitely my favorite of the two. You have part 1 and part 2 in this book, and then parts 3, 4, and 5 in this book, but both of them are absolutely phenomenal, and I need more Cici in my life. This just follows her story of journaling, and she also loves to solve mysteries, so if you like mysteries, I think this is a good one. She always kind of like observes people really closely and just tries to figure out if there's something up with them, and then she solves these mysteries around them. She also has friends that help her along the way, but then she's also struggling with grief and the loss of her father along the way as well. So there is just so many elements to these books. If you like middle grade graphic novels and you want a really good, heartwarming story, definitely check these out. Coming in at number 7 is a book that I didn't realize I was going to love so much. So honestly, so many of these books are surprises to me. But this is a book that is a children's classic that I have wanted to read for a couple of years, and I finally picked it up this year, and I am blown away at how much this story has taken my year by storm, and that is The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett. This story is, again, a classic, and it was originally written in 1911, so it is an older story, but it is one that in some ways really stands the test of time. Now, I will say that as an older written book and as a world who has advanced a little since then, there are some problematic things in this book, but overall, this story is one of my favorites of all time. Reading this book really led me to so many other books that I read and loved this year. I've read multiple adaptations or reimaginings of the story, and I've loved almost every single one of them. I'm not going to go into much depth with the synopsis here because I feel like most people are at least a little familiar with the story, but I will say that before I went into it, I wasn't super familiar with the story. So I would say just go in blind, even if you don't like classics, because I definitely am not somebody who typically picks up classics. Just go into this and listen to it if you need to on Audible or wherever you listen to your audiobooks and read along with it. I watched the 1993 movie adaptation as well, and this book like made me happy, made me sad, made me laugh, made me cry. There are so many good things in this book. I don't know. It is a book that may not be my top book. It's not number 1, but it's definitely like the book of the year for me in the sense of it has caused me to read so many other books. It's a story that's followed me, and it just, I don't know, it just makes me so stinking happy. Number 6 is a spooky middle grade novel, which should come as no surprise to anyone because I love those. And this one is the 4th and final book in the Small Spaces series by Katherine Arden. This one is Empty Smiles. This may be my favorite book in the whole series, which is crazy because it's the last one. I will say that it does end a little bit abruptly, which the first book kind of did too, but just taking into account that it's a short book, a short series, and it's a middle grade series, I absolutely fell in love with this. If you don't already know, this follows our main characters, Ollie, Coco, and Brian, and in the first book, Ollie finds this book that talks about a story called Small Spaces, and it's about this farm with some creepy scarecrows and a smiling man, and her and her classmates end up taking a field trip to this exact farm. She meets the smiling man and chaos ensues from there. So all 4 books in the series follow these 3 children, and they're in different seasons. So the first one takes place in the fall, and then it's winter, spring, and this last one's in summer. And this one, obviously the scare factor in this one is clowns. And clowns do terrify me, but this was so good. The creep factor was so high. The story was so good. The writing was so good. I highly recommend it. Even if you're somebody who only really reads like adult horror, I think you should definitely check out Katherine Arden's work because it is so good. This is one of my favorite spooky middle grade books of all time. This one and this entire series as a whole. And I feel like most people just kind of are accustomed to me recommending it. So if you haven't picked it up yet, why? Okay, we have reached my top 5. It's getting serious, y'all. So this is so hard for me because It's so hard because I feel like 4 and 5 are really close together, so just know that. But I don't have book number 5 with me because my mom is borrowing it, and I'm pretty sure she's loving it. We're going to talk about it at Christmas because I am filming this before Christmas, but I'm so excited to talk to her about it. This is the other Sally Hepworth book, and that is The Good Sister. And this book, you guys, like, Elizabeth, if you're watching, thank you so much for introducing me to Sally Hepworth and telling me that you love this book, because she's seriously like potentially a new favorite author. Not like my new favorite author of all time, but like a new favorite author. I'm so serious. This book and these characters absolutely gripped my heart. I love Sally Hepworth's writing. I love her characters. I tabbed the mess out of this book, and I do not tab books, but let me just tell you, this is about our main character, Fern, and Fern is, I'm not going to say this right, and I forget to look this up every time I start a video to talk about this book, but Fern struggles with some like sensory issues. She's on the spectrum a little bit, but she's like one of the best characters I have ever read about in a book. I love her so much. I want to be her best friend. She's phenomenal. She's quirky, and I love her so much. And also, she's a librarian, so dream best friend right there. So Fern has a sister named Rose, and Rose really wants to get pregnant, but she is not able to. So Fern takes it upon herself to be like a surrogate for Rose because she loves her so much and she wants to help her out. So she's trying to find a way to get pregnant so she can give her sister her baby. And chaos ensues from there. As most of these books, I feel like chaos ensues. But Rose is a very overprotective sister, and maybe not always the best sister. This, again, is not necessarily a thriller, but a family drama book with some suspense in there, some mystery thrown in there. There's back and forth timelines a little bit in here in a certain way, and I just loved this book. I did have a vlog on this book. So it's when Elizabeth picked my TBR for me one month. So I'm going to link that down below as well so you can get kind of my raw thoughts on The Good Sister. But this is one of my favorite books. I mean, obviously it's number 5. So if you haven't read it yet, taking into account all that I've said, it's not a thriller, because I know some people think that this author writes thrillers, but they're really not thrilling. They're just like family drama / suspense. But this is so good. And as somebody who doesn't typically like character-driven stories, I really love this one, and it is character-driven, but it was so stinking good. Okay, we are down to number 4, and this is a book that 10,000% surprised me. That is The Storied Life of AJ Fikry by Gabrielle Zevin. This book came out of nowhere for me. It came out of left field. Somebody threw me a curveball. I was about to unhaul this book, and I was like, you know what? This movie just came out, and I feel like I really need to try it. I really need to read this book so I can watch the movie, because it has one of my favorite actresses in it. Lucy Hale's in it, and I was like, yeah, you know, whatever. I'll give this a try. I probably won't like it. I should have tabbed this book, you guys. Oh my goodness. Like, what did I read? I am absolutely obsessed with this book. I can't remember if I vlogged this or not. If I did, I'll leave it linked down below, or if it's talked about anywhere else in more depth. But I feel like the emotion I'm evoking right now is telling you how I feel about this book. This is a book about bookshops and books and a lot of other things as well, such as grief and found family and all the fun things. So this follows AJ Fikry, and his life is not at all what he expected it to be. He is a bookshop owner on this beautiful little island, but he is not very happy about his job at the moment. He honestly is just really wanting to call it quits. He lost his wife a few months back, and he hasn't been the same since. Then one day, Amelia, or Amy as her friends call her, comes to his bookshop, and Amelia is this woman who is a bookseller for a publishing company, and she is trying to sell AJ some books for his shop, and he is just the most like grumpy character you have ever met in your life, but with good reason. He didn't really make a great first impression on Amy, but she does come back along the way. After this, and after all that AJ's already been through, he ends up losing one of his prized possessions, this book that was really important to him because he was going to sell it, and he was going to take that money to close his shop and retire early. Now, AJ's only in his 30s. I believe he's in his late 30s when all of this is going on. So this is kind of a heavy thing for him. So that happens. But then right after that, this kind of pleasant surprise pops up on his doorstep and really changes his life, and the story goes on from there. I don't think you need to know anything else other than that. Just know this book is so good. It made me laugh. It made me tear up. It didn't make me boohoo cry. But after I watched the movie, which by the way, if you have Amazon Prime and you have not watched this movie yet and you want to read the book and watch the movie, I highly recommend it. The book to movie adaptation was on point. I think there were a couple of small changes, but for the most part, I watched the movie right after I read the book, and it really held up. And I boohoo cried multiple times in that movie, like middle and the end. It was so good. It was cast so well. I love the way that it was filmed, and it really just brought this story to life for me. So if you have not read The Storied Life of A.J. Fikry, I highly recommend picking it up. There is such beautiful writing in this book. It's so quotable. There's so many like great one-liners in here. Again, I really wish I would have tabbed this one. And it just has so many good life lessons, and it's just such a really heartwarming story. Also, I don't think I've mentioned it, but all of these books are 5 stars if you didn't already know. But let's go ahead and move on to book number 3. You're really gonna see where like my world has been rocked this year by these books. I'm telling you, the last half of the year, I just had no idea that this was gonna happen. So the top 3 books have been switched around multiple times the past couple of months as I thought, what is my top book? And all 3 of these books are just such pleasant surprises for me. Books that I'm so glad that I read, books that I love so much and will always recommend. So let's just go ahead and start with number 3, and that is The Dead Romantics by Ashley Poston. This author has written some like fairy tale romances before, or like retellings of fairy tales in the real world with the romance, and I've just never really been curious about picking up her books. But my friend Olivia from Liv's Library was reading this book and she was really loving it, and I thought that I would really like it. So I do have more thoughts on this book. It's linked down below, and it's in the video where Olivia picked books for me to read, and she didn't actually pick this one, but she talked about it so much I just included it in there anyway. So if you want my raw thoughts and emotions, you can check that one out. But this is such a sweet story. It is a romance book, and it's a little bit paranormal as well. It follows our main character, Florence Day, and she is a ghostwriter for this really popular author. And then one day she just decides that she doesn't believe in love anymore. And so she goes to her publisher or to the editor and tells him like, I can't write this anymore. She's kind of having a crisis. Then she finds out that her dad has passed away. So she has to go back home down south to this small town with her family. And her dad and her family own a funeral home. And so that adds a really interesting element as well. But she goes home, and something that I haven't mentioned yet that is really unique about this book is that Florence and her dad actually have the ability to see ghosts. And when she goes home to this funeral home, a ghost of someone she knows unexpectedly shows up, and the story goes on from there. This is such a sweet story. This is like, it's so good. It's so good. It is so happy and fluffy and all the good things, but it also explores grief. So don't just think you're just going to get a fluffy story here, but this book made me so happy. I love this book so much. It is 5 stars, hands down. Like I said, all these books are 5 stars, but this is just so good. I loved the romance in this one and wondering how it was going to play out. I will say there is a twist that happens that I did see coming, but there was another twist that happened that I had no idea was even going to come into play, and that one really got me. So I think even if you can predict this book, just go into it and enjoy the ride, because the writing is beautiful, the story is beautiful, and I loved this one so, so much. And let me tell y'all, I really thought that The Dead Romantics was going to be my number 2 book this year. And then December happened, and I read my favorite romance of all time, my perfect romance, my perfect book, everything. Like, there was no complaints at all. Like, The Dead Romantics, I love this book, don't get me wrong, but there was some smut in there. And you guys know, I love my clean romances, which where are they? I don't know. I haven't read them until now. And this book, you guys, this book, like, it just makes me so happy. It just makes me so, so happy. Yeah. Okay. So I read a Christmas book that I love so, so much. It's my new favorite Christmas book. It is my new favorite romance of all time. And that is A Cross Country Christmas by Courtney Walsh. I heard about this book last year. Didn't pick it up last year. Didn't know if I was going to pick it up this year. But I got gifted it last year from Olivia. Thank you, Liv, because, oh my gosh. Can we just have a moment of silence for this book? It's so good. Okay, so this book follows Lauren and Will, which, by the way, my husband's name is Will, if you didn't already know that. So that just like makes me love this book even more. And Lauren, I can't even talk about this book. So Lauren is having to go home for Christmas. Her brother's wife is having a baby, and it's very important for her to get home, but Lauren is terrified of flying. So her brother ends up setting her up with a road trip ride with his best friend. And his best friend is Will. And Lauren, when she was a child, had a crush on Will, and now she's not really Will's biggest fan. So you get to kind of see when Lauren was 12 and Will was 14, how they first met, how her crush developed. You get to see bits and pieces of like present and then past of why she feels the way she does about Will now. The banter in this, you guys, I'm about to give you a hot take here. The banter in this is better than Emily Henry. I like this book better than the Emily Henry book that I read this year, because Beach Read was a 4-star for me, and it is not on this list, and I did like it. I did. But this one takes the cake. I'm spilling the tea all over the cake that this took, because this is so good. It's so good. There's no smut in this, okay? It is a clean romance, but there's still that little bit of like, you get glimpses of things, if that makes sense. And I love, it's just so wholesome. It's so wholesome, and I love it so much. So Lauren is taking this road trip with Will, and it gets to be a longer road trip than she expected. They take pit stops along the way. Like I said, the banter in this is phenomenal. I was laughing throughout this whole book. The emotions that I had was crazy. I teared up a little bit at the end. It was just literally my perfect book. I cannot say anything more about it. I can't say enough good things. I'm speechless. Courtney Walsh is like my new favorite romance author, and she actually has another book, A Cross Country Wedding, coming out next year, which I'm pretty sure is the second book in this series. And I can't wait to read that. I can't wait to read Merry Xmas. Like, this is my perfect romance. So if you guys have read this and know any books that are similar to this, please recommend them to me. The writing was perfect. The romance was perfect. The pacing was perfect. The length was perfect. Everything about this book was perfect, perfect, perfect. And now we are at my top book of the year, which I feel like at this point, you guys probably know what it is. I will say that I debated on whether or not this was my top book, but I haven't had enough time to sit on this book, okay? I just read it a couple weeks ago. I really, really love it. It is a top book, and who knows, I may change my mind a few months down the road. But there's a book that I read this year that I was so surprised that I liked. I did not have any clue. It's another book that came out of left field. Clearly, all of these books did. It is a book that I just really didn't know if I was going to like or not. And man, this book took me on a ride. I felt so many different things. I vlogged this. I'll leave it down below. But I felt so many things about this book. And it really, really impacted me. So much so that I handed this book to multiple coworkers that read it, and we talked about this book. 3 of my coworkers actually read this book and talked about it with me. My friends read this book, and you guys want to know what it is. If you don't already know, it's The Last House on Needless Street by Catriona Ward. I did tab this book. I have no words for this book either. I really don't know what to say. This book is just so, so good. And there are some people out there that don't like this book, that have some qualms with this book, that think there are some problematic things about this book. And are there? Maybe. But I do think it's kind of depending on what bothers you or not, or how your like perspective is going into this book. I will say the thing that people typically have problems with in this book is kind of explained in the author's note in the back. And I feel like what people typically don't like in this is kind of justified. That is my opinion, but this is so good. So I'm just going to read you the synopsis of this book, because I don't want to tell you any more than this, and I easily could because I love this book. But it says, in a boarded up house on a dead-end street at the edge of the wild Washington woods lives a family of 3. A teenage girl who isn't allowed outside, not after last time. A man who drinks alone in front of his TV, trying to ignore the gaps in his memory. And a house cat who loves napping and reading the Bible. An unspeakable secret binds them together, but when a new neighbor moves in next door, what is buried among the birch trees may come back to haunt them all. So this story has multiple points of view, which I love. It follows our main character, Ted, and Ted is a character. Also, Olivia the cat is a character that I absolutely love. She's very sacrilegious, but it's hilarious, okay? I'll just say that. This is not a book for the faint of heart. This is a very heavy book. This is a very solemn book. I think you should look up triggers for this book if you think you might need to. But this book really gripped my heart. There is a character in this book that I just like cried for. I wept for. I yearned for, like, just to hug this character. I had so many feelings in this book that were unexpected. I sobbed when I finished this book. You need to watch the vlog of me reading this book. It's linked down below. But and I know I'm saying this about a lot of these books, but I feel like my fresh thoughts are always like the better thoughts versus at the end of the year recounting thoughts and feelings that I don't currently have, but just the memories of them. So I don't know. I will never forget this book. I will never forget the story. I will never forget the way it made me feel. And it really made me feel some type of way about people that deal with stuff like the people in this book dealt with, like in real life. Like the fact that this is something that people go through broke my freaking heart. Like it broke me. It absolutely broke me. It's heavy. It's good. And it's scary. It is definitely that. But yeah, I just really encourage you to give this book a try if you haven't already. I know the writing is a little bit weird and everywhere, but to me it was worth it. It may not be to you, but this is my top book, my favorite book that I read this year. Okay, we've made it. The lighting has probably changed because it got dark outside and I realized I needed to film this a little last minute. But I think the main part of this and the main reason we're here is for you to see the joy that I have in all these books that I read this year and hopefully get some recommendations. I don't know if you guys have read any of these books or not, but if you have read them and loved them and they're in your top books of the year, let me know down in the comments below. If you found a book today that you really are interested in trying in the new year, let me know what that book is, if I've convinced you to read any books. Or maybe let me know what your favorite book of the year was if you want to do that. But if anything else, if you have nothing else to say or you just really don't know what to comment, go ahead and leave me a cat emoji down below because my top book was The Last House on Needless Street and Olivia the cat is a character in this book. So definitely leave me a cat emoji if you don't know anything else to leave down below. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoyed getting to see me just like get so giddy about the books that I read and loved this year. Again, this was such a hard list for me to make because I feel like it was a really good reading year for me and I loved so many of these books. But welcome to my top 10. I hope you enjoyed it. I appreciate you guys so much as always, and I will see you in my next video. Bye, friends.